All right, so back on page 1, the first video of this unit, we talked about how in order to take emotion out of evaluating the validity of different arguments and looking at how logically they're structured, we were going to use variables and symbols to do that, so that we take actually the entire context away. And this is the point in the unit where we get those symbols and we start to learn how to do that. Okay, so first of all, we've got all of those connectives. We learned about our and, our conjunction, our or, the disjunction, our if-then conditionals, and our if and only if biconditional. And then we're going to throw our not in there. It's not really a connective, but we do need to have a symbol for a negation. And so we're going to have 5 different symbols that we use. Okay, these symbols are going to be very important from here until the end of the unit. So the symbol for and kind of looks like like a caret is what they'll call that. Some of you might associate it with an exponent key on your calculator, but that is the symbol for and. So when we see that in this unit, we're going to use the word and. Or is the upside down version of that, like a V. Okay, that's going to mean or. If then is going to be represented by an arrow pointing to the right. Okay, an arrow pointing to the right. So whatever comes to the left of the arrow would be like, if da da blah 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 happens, arrow, then da 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 happens. But the arrow means both. Okay. If and only if, a biconditional, is an arrow going both directions. Okay. And the symbol for not is a tilde. If any of you speak Spanish, that's the tilde, but that's the symbol that we use for that. Okay. All right. So then what we do is we take the simple statements, whether there's one or if it's a compound statement, we 2, 3, 4, whatever, and we use lowercase letters. P, Q, R are the most common ones that are used. I don't know why. Okay, so let's take, for example here, let's use P to represent the simple statement, Teddy's a dog. All right, let's use Q to represent the simple statement, Oreo is a hamster. Then if you see this in symbols, okay, that symbol in between the P and the Q is an and, okay? So that would mean P, Teddy is a dog, and Q, Oreo is a hamster. Okay, if you wanted to take the statement, if Teddy is a dog, then Oreo is not a hamster, that would be written, so the if part is the Teddy is a dog, that's P. Okay, then because it's an if then, we put the arrow to the right, and then Oreo is not a hamster. Remember, Oreo being a hamster is Q, and the symbol for not is the little tilde. So you would have P, and then your arrow, and then your not Q. All right, so even though you say if first, notice the P is written first. So you would say, if Teddy is a dog, then Oreo is not a hamster. All right, so what we're going to do next is go through and take a couple simple statements here and then write them in words based on what we see in symbols. So P is the statement, I study for the exam. Q is the statement, I pass the exam. So now we're going to take the symbols and we're going to write them in words. Okay, so Q is the statement, I pass the exam. Okay, so I pass the exam. Then we've got that symbol in here. Okay, that's our biconditional. So if and only if. P, I study for the exam. Okay, so I pass the exam if and only if I study for the exam. Now, one other thing to point out is verb tense really doesn't have anything to do with what's going on. So if you think that sounds awkward, you could change the tenses around and you could say something like, I will pass the exam if and only if I study for the exam. Okay, that would probably be the more natural way to say it. So you can certainly put in like a future tense. I will pass the exam if and only if I study. And I'll do that. I'll I'll mix up the tenses just a little bit throughout the examples and give you some other options as well. Okay, so now we have the symbol for not P. So this is saying I don't study for the exam, okay? I do not study for the exam. I'm going to put this in past tense because that would be kind of weird. So I didn't study for the exam. Okay, then we've got our little symbol there in the middle. That's our conjunction. So that would be and then Q. I passed the exam. Okay, I didn't study for the exam. And I pass would be weird again because of the tenses. So I would say, and I passed the exam. Okay, I didn't study and I passed the exam. All right, looking at part C, statement P. So again, we're back to I study, okay? Then we've got our symbol or, and then we've got a not Q. So again, you can make it in present tense. It might sound a little weird because that would be I study for the exam or I do not pass the exam. I mean, you could certainly say that. Okay, we could put it in future tense, which is what I'm going to go ahead and do for this one again, just to show you some variations. So I will study for the exam. There's our symbol, or I will not pass the exam. And again, we've got that symbol not, okay? So just insert a not in there. And again, the tense is fine. If you want to say I study for the exam or I passed the exam, that's fine. You could say I studied for the exam or I would not pass the exam. Again, mess with the tenses. All right. And then the last one here. So we've got a not P, okay? And then notice our symbol there is our conditional. That's an if then. So let's go ahead and put the if first, because in English, that's where it would come. So it would be if I, and this is a not. So do not study for the exam. Then that's our conditional. I, and it's a not Q. I will not pass the exam. Okay. And one other thing I do want to point out real quick is if you don't want to include the word then, you don't necessarily have to write it out. It would be implied. If I don't study for the exam, I won't pass the exam, or I will not pass the exam. The then can be implied, okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be written out. So again, just be aware of that as you're working through these types of problems.